In the Perspectrum podcast, we discuss controversial topics. Outside of this context, Michael and I are both working professionals. While doing this show, we are not acting as agents or representatives of our respective institutions, and none of the views that we express reflect the outlooks of our employers. So don't come to my office and throw toilet paper at me.
And I don't have an office, but don't come to my cube. Hello and welcome to the Perspectrum. I'm Michael Bloom.
And I'm Nathan Seelove.
Today we have a very exciting episode for you. We will start off by talking about the attempted coup in Russia, as weird as that fucking thing got. And then our second segment will focus on Hunter Biden, his recent plea deal, and some of the kind of revelations that have been coming out around that. Try to break it down for you. Ultimately, it's worth kind of evaluating these claims and determining what kind of influence they actually have on our politics, because, it's really a hot topic in the news, and maybe it should be, maybe it shouldn't be. We'll get to it.
Or maybe it should be, but not for the reason that it is.
Yeah. Ooh, tricky. What a nuanced take. Ooh.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Cool.
Real quick, though, we would also like to acknowledge that there are a lot of Supreme Court cases that are now coming out that have been decided that we are not covering on this episode. Mm-hmm. Partially because we had already planned the episode, and partially because there's probably going to be more court decisions that are going to come out by next week, so we're probably going to save that for next week.
Totally. Yeah, a lot of those decisions just came out today as we're recording, and ultimately, we're not the legal analysts. We got to read a lot about and do the research in order to do that. So it takes a little bit of time for that to work its way through. Yeah. So without further delay, let's talk about Russia.
Yeah. Then on to Plan B, Russia, a obscure reference to a film that Michael and I made when we were teenagers.
That I don't think anybody will ever get to see again.
That I don't think. I think it's still up.
That one's still up? Okay, a lot of them I know.
Yeah, that one. A lot
up.
of them I took down, but that one didn't have anything too bad in it. That's still up. It's just stupid.
Yeah, fair enough. So that's a little Easter egg if you feel like going and trying to find that on the internet. So you've heard of Russia. They're invading Ukraine. It's not going great for Russia. Overall, things have been rough. Ukraine has now launched a counteroffensive against Russian forces. While Russia's putting up a pretty fierce resistance. Ultimately, the story of their invasion of Ukraine has been pretty consistently bad. Yeah. They've been losing lots of soldiers in battle. They've been losing internationally due to sanctions and losing a lot of confidence domestically. And as Ukraine continues to kind of intensify their war effort, including getting pilots trained to fly F-16s, Putin's behavior has become, even more erratic and causing even more loss of confidence at home, including Russian oligarchs and elites who are doubtful about their ability to win in Ukraine and are really just hoping for the war to kind of stall out, or at least Russia to be able to get out of it without being totally humiliated. And so against that backdrop, those elites launched a little bit of a coup d'etat, a coup de grace, yeah.
Yeah, good old-fashioned coup d'etat. And it's interesting because when you spend some more time looking into the reasoning behind it, you start to realize that it's probably more one of self-preservation on Prigozhin's part than it is him actually taking a stance or having a principle. Yeah. Because basically what happened was that a few weeks ago, the Defense Ministry of Russia decided that the paramilitary groups that were fighting in Ukraine would now have to basically be directly absorbed by the Russian military, meaning that Prigozhin would pretty much lose his immediate power over the Wagner group. And of course, he didn't want that. He didn't want to give up his power. And in response to that, he basically said, fuck you, I'm not doing that. And then Putin doubled down and said, fuck you, you are doing that. And then Prigozhin came out and said, fuck you, I'm really not doing that. And then he probably realized, shit, I just said that to Vladimir Putin. The dude that poisons people's underwear for looking at him funny. This motherfucker's going to poison my condoms someday. I got to do something about this. And so he basically unleashed this whole, it was like a 30-minute rant about how terrible things are going in the war against Ukraine. That was released. And initially he didn't directly criticize Putin, but he was still violating the laws against criticizing the war.
Yeah.
And then slowly but surely he doubled down and doubled down and doubled down until he pretty much his entire military company just turned on Russia and started marching towards Moscow. And this weekend they were within 120 miles of Moscow.
Yeah, that's fucking insane. So yeah, that's mind-blowing. Ultimately, yeah, he'd been kind of like apparently like sowing the seeds of this rebellion for a while, releasing these like rants on his Telegram channel. The Wagner group had also been releasing like these as well. He even like tried to, I think did some like disinformation a little bit. He appears to have faked a Russia-led attack on the Wagner group to give himself a little bit of plausible rationale for going in and rebelling against Russia. And then his aides actually hacked into Russian state TV to release one of his long rants denouncing the defense minister. So, as Nathan said, like one night last week, they just, his forces, because again, this guy is a billionaire oligarch in Russia who runs not only a restaurant and catering company, but also one of like their most influential, most powerful paramilitary mercenary groups. This group is active around the world representing Russian interests, enacting regime change, doing training, supporting like authoritarian leaders around the world and representing Russia's interests. And so like this dude has a lot of not only like soft power, but literal military power at his disposal. So last week, the Wagner group released a statement on Telegram saying, quote, "Putin made the wrong choice. All the worse for him. Soon we'll have a new president." And then started their march back from Ukraine into Russia, taking control of Rostov-on-Don, a city of more than 1 million people, which is the center of Russia's logistics effort in support of the Ukrainian war, and released this statement, Prigozhin did, that if the defense minister wasn't like ousted, that he would lead his army to Moscow. And that's exactly what he attempted to do, which is fucking crazy. This guy like is in command of his own private army and is leading it against Russia, whose army is in Ukraine, right? Like this is a highly trained mercenary force against like Russia's internal security and maybe like basically like their internal like national police forces and stuff like that. So like they're fucking freaking out.
Like what's interesting is how long he got away with criticizing Putin.
Yeah.
Putin's a guy that's chopped off the fingers of people for less, but he kind of just let Prigozhin criticize him for a while. And the only reason why he did was because the very few victories that they did have in Ukraine were basically because of the Wagner forces. Yeah, like Michael said, these are highly trained mercenaries that have, many of which have a lot of experience on these people. And what's also interesting about the Wagner group is that Russia has tried to deny their existence for years. Yeah, and technically, they're not exactly a legal group because, like in Russian law, they're not supposed to have private military mercenary people.
I wonder why.
But what's interesting is they've been able to get away with it because, for one thing, like they have basically been doing what Russia tells them to do. And
Yeah.
for another thing, in legal terms, they're considered a volunteer group.
Yeah.
Which is funny because like they get paid a fuck ton, and they're frequently advertising their benefits to various people.
Yeah, and apparently, like Putin was actually instrumental in creating this group a few years ago, and they were like at the center of the invasion of eastern Ukraine in 2014. They're basically like Russia's military force that they're able to plausibly deny is controlled by the Russian government, which enables them to do all kinds of stuff without implicating necessarily directly the Russians, which is a total fucking Putin move. Like the thinnest veil of plausible deniability or rationale, he's just going to go in with military force. Like that is his playbook 101.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, before you go and start saying that Prigozhin is a big hero, I would just like to point out that there was a BBC article that my friend Josh, who's been following this very closely, pointed out to me, where basically one of Prigozhin's criticisms at one point was that the Russian ministry was not willing to use tactical nuclear strikes.
Great.
Which is a little confusing because he's also criticized them for doing the war in the first place. But I guess it's like, hey, if you're going to do a war, do it properly.
Yeah, kill everyone.
Kill everybody.
Yeah.
So not necessarily a good guy. And I honestly, it's hard to say if the coup had succeeded, which it probably wouldn't have. But if the coup had succeeded, it's unclear as to whether Prigozhin would be a step up from Putin.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And ultimately, like it ended in a weird way. Like this was so strange. So as Nathan said, picture this. We've got mercenary forces like 1,000 kilometers from Moscow. They start, marching towards the capital city. Police in Moscow are putting up barricades and trying to get ready for this, right? Like the column of like heavy equipment that is on its way to Moscow gets attacked a little bit, ultimately to like no avail. Prigozhin's soldiers shoot down an attack helicopter. They shoot down a couple of other aircraft, killing some Russians, and like are within, a couple of hours of arriving in Moscow when out of nowhere, Belarus's president, Alexander Lukashenko, announces that the rebellion's off and that he's brokered a deal between Prigozhin and Putin. Like, out of nowhere. What? Just
Which
totally avoid this.
It should
this
be
conflict.
pointed out that Belarus is kind of just a puppet of Russia.
Totally.
Like, they're not really a sovereign nation. They're absolutely a puppet of Russia.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it is interesting that they kind of acted as a broker in this.
Especially if they are a puppet of Russia. They're like, I mean, again, maybe that's just another attempt of Putin to like save face while trying to reach a deal. Prigozhin then says like his followers really wanted to avoid bloodshed, despite, I don't know, starting the rebellion in the first place.
Yeah. My military mercenaries whose literal job is to kill people, they didn't want to do any bloodshed.
They're really a group of sensitive, nice guys. Yeah.
No,
so
again, I think it's kind of similar to what I said earlier. Like I think he started this to be in the beginning to try to avoid like as self-preservation. And I think that he ended it as a matter of self-preservation because I think he realized when he doubled down on telling them, no, you're not going to absorb the Wagner company into the Russian military.
Yeah.
When he doubled down on that, he knew his ass was in trouble. So he had to give himself some leverage. And I think he also knew perfectly well that there was no way that coup was going to succeed and his ass was going to die if he tried. And so he cut a deal because he was trying to preserve himself.
Yeah. Yeah, that does seem to track. It really does. Ultimately, the soldiers as part of this group are going to face like no prosecution. They will be integrated into the regular army kind of as planned. Prigozhin is going into exile in Belarus, which, as Nathan pointed out, it's pretty much like Russia. He's a billionaire as well, so he's probably doesn't have that much to worry about. And so this whole thing will kind of just like fade away into the background, at least to some extent.
See, I don't agree with that. I think, knowing Putin, first off, any soldier that was involved in this, like for the next 10 years, look over your shoulder, dude.
Yeah.
Like I think if I were one of those soldiers, I'd get the fuck out of Russia right now. I'd be like, I'd get my family
being
out.
sent back to Ukraine.
I'd get out of the reach of Russia.
The reach of the Russian military.
Like I'd take my family and I'd go live on some remote island somewhere because like that dude's going to remember this and he's going to poison you. And I do not think that Prigozhin's going to get away with this. I think that, yes, they reached the deal. And I think that this is going to, like, the dust is going to settle and the media is going to stop talking about it. And this is going to become just a blip on the radar in the Ukrainian war. And then in a year or two, when everybody's forgotten Prigozhin's name, we're going to see a tiny little blip in the media saying, Russian oligarch Prigozhin mysteriously dies under uncertain circumstances. And we're all going to know what happened. Like, I'm telling you, I'm calling it now. That's what's going to happen. And I think there's a good chance that some other people that were involved in this coup are also going to suffer the same fate.
Interesting.
I think that Putin's going to wait until the world's not watching. But I think that that's ultimately what's going to happen.
Interesting. Yeah, especially like I can see being okay with the soldiers going and returning to the military for now, given that they have a pretty desperate need for troops, especially skilled ones. But like, you know, that clock is, I guess, got to run out at some point, or they just keep putting you on the front lines.
Putin has a list, is what I'm saying. Putin has a list of every single soldier that was involved in that coup. And, you know, he might use them for now. But, like, after they're out of the conflict, whether they win or lose the war with Ukraine, when everything's settled and they're in peace times, he's going to still have that list. And he's going to go through that list.
So, yeah, I mean, that is totally possible. I'd be really curious to see how that ends up, although maybe we'll never get comprehensive.
And maybe it'll only have the higher ups on it. Maybe it won't be every single soldier, but like there's going to be some mysterious, you know, well, he so-and-so Russian former soldier, former member of Wagner company seemed to just throw himself out the window last Tuesday. Like that's
police are no longer investigating.
It's been ruled a suicide.
Yeah. Well, so what I'm curious about though, because I don't really care too much about the Wagner Company group. I don't really care too much about Prigozhin. I'm kind of curious about what this exhibits on like the international stage, what it may or may not inspire people to do domestically, like what this might mean for Russia's position in Ukraine and internationally. That's my big question.
And I don't know if I have an answer for you.
Yeah. No, I don't think anybody does yet. I mean, ultimately, this seems like just another, you know, next logical step of some, you know, loss of kind of domestic confidence, although it's very possible, to your point, that this is just a pure attempt at you know, self-preservation and not an indication that like Prigozhin himself was like, you know, skeptical of the war effort necessarily, although he claims to be publicly. But at the very least, a demonstrated coup during wartime against an authoritarian president for the first time in his 23 years as you know, the leader of the nation. It does make you question, and I imagine it would make the you know, just continue to sow doubt in the public, in the minds of the public in Russia. And I know like Ukraine seems to be celebrating this. They seem to be, you know, excited that there was some kind of at least political unrest domestically in Russia. So I can't imagine that it helps the Russian war effort, but I guess it remains to be seen whether it hurts it at all.
Yeah, hell, if I were in Ukraine, I'd be laughing my ass off right now.
Yeah, right.
But I think that there's a few potential scenarios that this presents us with. I think scenario number one is based on the fact that Putin had been doing all he could to prevent people in Russia from knowing just how badly things are going in Ukraine, what they're doing in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And he'd been cracking down on people for speaking out against the war. In Russia, you can get 5 to 15 years in prison for speaking out against the war.
Jeez.
For even hell, you can't you're not even supposed to call it a war. But the fact that you had a large scale, I mean, unofficial sect of the military basically almost march a coup on Moscow.
Yeah.
And the fact that his justifications, whether it was for self-preservation or not, what he was saying was this shouldn't be happening in the first place. This is a bullshit war. We're going into Ukraine on false pretenses. This is not a war of defense, and we're throwing lives away, Russian lives away for nothing, basically. The fact that you had a person with that loud of a mouthpiece take a step like that makes it really difficult for the average Russian citizens to be able to ignore what's going on. They're being confronted with it.
Yeah.
And that's the type of thing that starts to spark civic unrest. So that's scenario number one. I think that this could result in more civic unrest. Scenario number two is sort of the scarier scenario, which is that it pushes Putin to be more desperate and potentially take more egregious means against Ukraine. And then I think scenario number three is kind of the boring scenario, which is that nothing really changes. And the thing is, this didn't take enough time for them to end up needing to retract any troops from Ukraine to defend Moscow.
Yeah.
So tactically, this really didn't do that much with regard to the war in Ukraine. If Putin is able to keep control of the narrative and able to keep control of the civic unrest, then I think that the war is just going to continue as it has been, and this is just going to be a blip on the radar. And I think that third scenario is probably going to be the most likely scenario.
Yeah, interesting. I'd be also really interested to see with the Wagner troops that go back into the Russian military, how where they end up. Because I imagine without, it's on the one hand, they could maintain the companies and the troop organization that the Wagner Group has, keeping all these mercenaries working together. But of course, when you're, it's not typically advisable to keep your rebellious force united. You generally want to divide those people up. So, but at the same time, to your point earlier, they're one of the more effective groups of soldiers in the war. So you might see some of that effectiveness diluted as they're integrated throughout the military. I'm also really curious what happens internationally with the Wagner Group now that they, kind of cut the head off the snake, because they operate in the Middle East and Africa and Latin America, and they implement Russian policy in Syria and the Sudan and Venezuela. And so ultimately there might be a little bit, I saw one analysis that described potentially a little bit of a power vacuum as Wagner forces kind of are dissipated internationally, which may present an opportunity even outside of Ukraine to kind of take control or at least gain influence as Russia's kind of losing that influence in those countries. So we'll see. I'm really curious to see what form it's going to take. At the very least, it's one of the first things that's happened in a while outside of the country of Ukraine that was totally a surprise, it seems, to Putin, totally outside of his radar and expectations. So at the very least, hopefully it's a wrench in the works. And now it's time for a more lighthearted segment, Good Actually. So Nathan, what is Good Actually?
Well, Michael, we do Good Actually because the world sucks.
Sure does.
It is literally hellfire. the air quality index listed my area as very unhealthy today.
Oof.
And it was, it's in the red zone. And outside, there is smoke everywhere. When I take my dogs out, I have them on leashes instead of just letting them roam free in the yard. I'm wearing a mask. It looks like hellfire outside. I had to play Doom today to fight against demons because I was in the mood of like, I need to fight against some hellfire right now because the world's terrible. But what's nice is that sometimes if you like try to swipe away the smoke and look really closely, you see that there might actually be some good somewhere in the world. And then you start wiping away even more of the smoke, and you spend some more time reading and looking and thinking, and you realize, you know what? Good actually is all around us.
Wow. That is really mushy of you to say.
Well, in my rant in which I talked about killing demons in a video game
and hellfire and the actual wildfires that are happening, that'll
be raging into winter. So
got that back around to something good. That's impressive. Very impressive.
Yeah. So Michael, what is our good actually this week?
Well, our good actually came from the most unexpected source, the United States Supreme Court.
You mean the entity that has like a negative 26,000 approval rating?
Yeah, exactly. The entity that has destroyed individual freedom and rights left and right over the last few years. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And so on Tuesday, the United States Supreme Court actually rejected a conservative legal theory. So there's this theory which is brought to them from a case in North Carolina called the independent state legislature theory, which
we actually covered on the pod.
Yes, if you want to go listen to it, that episode was from the second week of July 2022, so you can go back and listen to that. And that was the episode where we were breaking down upcoming Supreme Court cases. And the case we're talking about now is from North Carolina. And basically, the independent state legislature theory is the idea that when it comes to federal elections, state legislatures basically have no limitations whatsoever, and that it's not possible for them to be limited by their state constitutions, and therefore their laws that they pass with regard to federal elections are not reviewable by state courts. So if that sounds convoluted, which I know it does, it basically puts the state legislature above their constitution and above review by the court in any question of federal elections, which means that in all of these states where there are really conservative state legislatures, they can do whatever they want, including things like just giving the electors to the Republican or extreme gerrymandering or anything like that. And so this is a totally unfounded, extreme legal theory, which is the brainchild of Republicans who are just trying to garner as much influence and control over corrupting federal elections as possible. Yeah. And we were really worried that the Supreme Court would buy into this ridiculous legal theory, and 3 out of the 9 of them did, but 6 of the 9 voted or voted to reject this crazy fucking legal theory that would really destroy democracy.
Yeah, and we're not saying that lightly. Yeah. This would give state legislatures the authority to so take Georgia, for example. Georgia, the legislature is controlled by Republicans, but Biden won the state in 2020. All right. This would have basically given the Georgia state legislature the authority to just be like, fuck democracy. Yeah. We're giving our electoral votes to Donald Trump. They could have done that under this. Yeah. The Supreme Court rejected it. It straight up would have destroyed democracy as we know it if they had not rejected this. And all the shame in the world on Neil Gorsuch, on Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito for voting in favor of overturning democracy as we know it.
Yeah.
And credit.
Take a deep breath.
To Amy Coney Barrett. Sorry, hold on. Brett Kavanaugh,
Brett, I like beer Kavanaugh.
John Roberts. Okay, I got through the hard ones. Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan. So credit to them, though.
Yeah, totally. To paraphrase an amazing character from literature, Inigo Montoya, John Roberts, you did something right.
And that's good, actually.
So for our next segment, we're talking about corruption. We're talking about the seat of the devil's influence on our society and on our world. We're talking about the corruption that comes from power and nepotism and influence. And so, of course, we're talking about someone that holds no official position in the government at all, Mr. Hunter Biden.
Yes. So I'm probably going to have a different take on this than most of what people will see in the media. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and discuss the facts of it.
Totally.
So this week, Hunter Biden, who is Joe Biden's son, had a plea agreement on 2 charges related to the failure to pay taxes. Now, this happened in 2017 and 2018. And basically, Biden was a resident of Washington, and he had a taxable income of more than $1.5 million, which, holy shit. I know that among elites that's standard, but I just want to point out, holy shit.
Especially for a guy who seemingly his only qualification is having the last name Biden.
Yeah, pretty much.
Not to echo like Republican, like conservative talking points, but
it's true. Like, it's true. So he owed more than $100,000 in income tax that he did not pay on time
each year.
So
each year,
in
2017 and 2018.
Yeah, that's no bueno. We don't like to see that. He did eventually pay, and
including
he has. Yes, and he has pled guilty to those charges, and it's looking like he will be receiving 2 years of probation as a result of that. Now, there's another charge that has been brought against him. It's still a little bit in limbo, and that is a gun-related charge.
Yeah.
As a lot of you probably know, or maybe you don't know because you don't really give a shit about Hunter Biden, Hunter Biden had a major drug problem just a few years ago. He was suffering from addiction to crack cocaine, and it was a really rough time in his life. And at one point, he bought a gun, and in filling out paperwork to buy that gun, he lied about his use of drugs on the document, which means that he was illegally in possession of a firearm for like 2 weeks. Like, he didn't have it for very long because apparently his wife threw it away, which honestly, probably a good thing.
Although, don't like throw it away. She threw it in like a dumpster. It's like,
yeah,
now you just have the gun your husband owns like available for people to take.
Yeah. But like, if you're someone that suffers from drug addiction, it is probably better to not have guns in the house.
Yeah, totally.
Which, by the way, I just like to point out, I do think it's kind of funny that Republicans are complaining about how the book was not thrown at Biden for a gun-related charge when they're the ones that are trying to like
make
limit
sure there are no gun-related charges.
Limit the very paperwork that Hunter Biden had to fill out in order to get the gun in the first place.
Yeah.
So like, if they were being intellectually honest, they would say like, this charge right here is bullshit because people shouldn't have to fill out that paperwork to get a gun. They should be able to, go to a vending machine and get a gun.
Yeah.
But of course they're not intellectually honest, so they're not going to say that.
Yeah. So what's interesting here is that, there's 2 potential charges apparently here. One is like lying on a federal form, basically. And the other is actually that it's, against federal law to possess or purchase a firearm when you are a user or addicted to a controlled substance like crack cocaine. Yeah, so there's kind of two potential things here, and it appears that he was only charged with the possession of a firearm rather than lying on a federal form. And from what I gather about reading about this one, like it's like fairly uncommon to be charged with lying on a federal form in these kinds of cases, unless that just gets tacked on to other kinds of charges. And usually even the possession, when it comes to addicts and addiction, even the possession of a firearm apparently is pretty rare to be charged anyway, unless it's like part of, again, like other crimes, or unless there was violence involved. So typically, it's not the kind of charge that would be charged, just for possession.
Yeah. Now, that being said, it looks like what's going to happen is that they're trying to get what's called a diversion. Mm-hmm. The gun charge is going to be handled as a diversion case, which basically means that because he is a nonviolent offender, mm-hmm. and because he has a substance abuse problem, if he can prove that he got his life back together, then the charge will likely be dropped.
Yeah.
Now, the question there is, how often does that actually happen? Mm-hmm. All right. Is he being given this specifically because they're trying to go easy on him, or is that something that is standard order? Well, it's a little bit complicated. According to a 2016 audit by the Office of the Inspector General, in August of 2015, 78 out of the 94 federal judicial districts didn't even have that program. Mm-hmm. All right.
Oh, for the diversion. Gotcha.
Yeah, didn't have the diversion program. And in fact, the number of diversion cases active decreased 1%, and there were only 356 of them.
Interesting.
Which accounted for less than 1% of active cases. And on top of that, this particular charge, when it is brought forward, the typical sentence, the average sentence for offenders of violating the code, which is 18 USC and 922G, is about 55 months in prison or in jail.
It's pretty long. Now, is that typically like paired with being a violent offender, or are these people that are only charged with?
So that's specifically felony possession.
Interesting.
Now, one of the things to point out is the fact that felony possession in that specific statute is treated pretty much the same with firearms and with drugs.
Interesting.
All right. It's a lot easier to prove that you were in possession of a firearm illegally, but it's a lot harder to prove that you were in possession of drugs illegally.
Gotcha.
So it's kind of treated as it's treated as felony possession. Mm-hmm. So like that may or may not be also involved with violent crimes, but in this case, we're just talking about the felony possession, and that would typically carry a sentence of 55 months. And it's looking like he's not going to get anything because of this particular circumstance in which he was, part of why he committed the crime was because he was addicted to drugs.
Yeah, and the way these diversion programs work is that, they basically set a set of requirements that the person has to meet, kind of like probation. And so in this case, the expectation, I think, is that Hunter Biden would remain drug-free and not commit any additional crimes for 2 years. And so similar kind of to probation, but it's kind of prior to being charged with the crime in the first place.
Yeah.
And it does require that you admit, that the crime occurred, and admit to facts in the case, and admit to your own addiction as well.
Yeah. So all in all, it's looking like what's going to result from this is, of course, the diversion program, in which Michael just laid out, and 2 years of probation, which a lot of Republicans are basically calling out as being a light sentence, a slap on the wrist, and trying to make the accusation that this is the Biden administration trying to go easy on Hunter Biden because he is Biden's son. Now, there's a few problems with that. the person who is actually carrying out the prosecution, it's David Weiss, which is a Trump appointee. He's a holdover from the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Garland has basically said, I am staying out of this.
Mm-hmm.
This Trump-appointed prosecutor, they have full reign. They have free reign. Now, you might argue, like, well, how do we know that he's staying out of it? I mean, I would say if you're a Trump-appointed prosecutor and the attorney general isn't interfering with your investigation, I see no reason why you wouldn't be public about that.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah, totally.
Why wouldn't you come out and say that? I think that the accusations of some level of nepotism based on the fact that he's Biden's son, I think that doesn't hold up, and it also misses the point. And in fact, I think that most analyses of this right now are missing the point, because the argument that Republicans are trying to make is that there is a two-tiered justice system for Democrats and for Republicans. Mm-hmm. That if a Republican commits something even minor, such as, Donald Trump, that they throw the book at him. Now, of course, the minor charge that they're referring to is stealing nuclear
fucking
secrets.
Espionage. But you know, who hasn't committed a little light treason?
And that when it comes to Democrats, they're less likely to throw the book at them and just give them a slap on the wrist for other criminal charges. And of course, what Democrats are going to say is either they're just going to ignore this because in the grand scheme of things, this probably doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
Or they're going to try to say, well, what Hunter Biden did was not nearly as bad as what Trump did. Mm-hmm. This is small potatoes. And honestly, the only reason why he's being charged in the first place was because the investigation started under the Trump administration by a Trump-appointed prosecutor. So this is actually, the fact that it's happening at all, the fact that he's being charged and all, is just because he is a Biden. So he's actually being prosecuted because of his political, his political ties. And I think both of those analyses miss the point in different ways. Mm-hmm. Because the United States does not have a single-tier justice system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're right about that.
And it never has.
Yeah.
They're right about that. But it's not about Democrats versus Republicans. It's about elites versus everybody else. Mm-hmm. Now, in researching this a little bit more, I've come to the conclusion that I think we should add another tier to that, or at least a sub-tier in the elite category. Because what happens most of the time is if a person of a lower socioeconomic status commits a crime, they're charged. They have the book thrown at them. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, they have to spend time in prison before there's even been a trial. They'll sometimes do a plea deal because they couldn't afford bail in the first place. And they will have their entire life ruined because of this, because they can't afford a good lawyer. They can't afford bail. They're fucked over by the system.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Then you have your average everyday elites that are kind of doing things behind the scenes. And they almost never get charged with anything unless what they do is particularly egregious and undeniable. They don't get charged with a goddamn thing. And then in the third tier, I would actually say you have elites that are still in a prestigious position and thus still get preferential treatment, but because they have a public profile, because they have a political profile or ties to a political person or are a political person, that there is more attention given to them. Mm-hmm. All right? That there is more of a partisan reason why they are pursued. And I think that is the category that both Donald Trump and Hunter Biden fall into. Mm. So here's what I mean by that. First off, let's look at the whole tax-related crimes thing. All right? When it comes to tax-related crimes, it's actually pretty rare for anybody to be convicted of it. In fact, according to a 2019 article from Tax Attorney Daily, fewer than 2,000 people were convicted of tax crimes, which represents 0.0022% of all taxpayers, despite the fact that the IRS estimates that 15.5% of taxpayers are not completely complying with with tax laws. So already, most people are not being charged with it. But it's also important to point out the fact that the people that tend to be committing tax fraud, that have a tendency to commit tax fraud, the people that tend to be the cheaters are often disproportionately people of a higher socioeconomic status. So people in the top 1% of earners account for 28% of tax evasion. Compare that to the bottom 50% of earners, which account for just 12%. All right.
Interesting.
1% account for 28%, and the bottom half account for just 12%. All right. So the people that tend to commit these crimes tends to be people of a higher socioeconomic status. People like Hunter Biden. But of course, it is something that is rarely pursued. Now, there's a lot of factors that are going to go into whether or not they're going to pursue it. Oftentimes, the more funding that the IRS has, the more likely they are to go after bigger targets, such as Hunter Biden, who does have more money, which is kind of funny considering the fact that Kevin McCarthy wanted them to decrease the budget for the IRS, which would make it harder for them to go after people like Hunter Biden, but whatever.
Well, they want to preserve our two-tier justice system, Nathan.
Yeah. So, so people involved with tax fraud are rarely charged to begin with. And the ones that tend to be guilty are disproportionately people that are the higher earners.
Yeah.
But here's another thing that I'd like to point out that is completely missing from his charges, and that is the drug-related charges. Now, he has admitted to smoking crack cocaine. All right? He has admitted to being in possession of drugs, to doing drugs. Like, that is something he has admitted to. Now,
he wrote a fucking book about it.
Yeah. Now, if you've listened to the show, you know that I am no drug warrior. All right. I think that it is fucked up that we lock up people like left and right for drug related crimes. But we do have to point out the fact that the reason why he was never charged with that, why it was never even considered that he would be charged with that, is because he's an elite. All right. It's because he's an elite. 1 in 5 incarcerated people today are locked up for drug-related offenses. 26% of all arrests in America, 26% are drug-related offenses. And before you think, oh well, what about sale versus just possession? 47,380 Americans are arrested annually for the sale and manufacture of heroin, cocaine, and other similar products. And 227,655 Americans are arrested annually for possession. So poor people are always going to be arrested for that crime, for the crime of drugs.
Yeah.
He's not going to be arrested. Hunter Biden's not going to be arrested. Poor people are going to be arrested. And I would also like to point out the fact that one of the biggest drug warriors of the 90s was a man by the name of Joseph Biden, who was the architect behind the 90s crime bill, which exacerbated the war on drugs, led to harsher criminal penalties for drug users, but also continued to create our two-tiered justice system. Because the people that were being charged were not the elites like Hunter Biden. They were your everyday lower socioeconomic status Americans. All right. The conversation to be had from all of these charges is the fact that, yes, Republicans are right when they say that Hunter Biden is being let off easy. They're absolutely right. The reason why Hunter Biden is being let off easy is because he's a rich elite who can afford a damn good lawyer. All right. That's why he's being let off. But the reason why he was even in the spotlight in the first place was because he was a Biden. Now, I think it's also fair to say that the reason why Trump is being charged with the things he's being charged with is because he has such a high profile that they can't really ignore all these crimes.
Well, it's hard to get possession of all those nuclear secrets if you're not of a high profile.
Well, yeah, that too. Like when it comes to some of the charges are directly related to him being president. Some of them aren't. Like some of his real estate shit, like that's not even related to him being president. That's just stuff that he did. And I think it is fair to say that if it weren't for the fact that he had been president, they probably never would have pursued that. But the problem is that they should have been. The problem is you shouldn't have to have a high profile for you to receive not even the same treatment as the rest of America, but like even minor consequences for what you do.
Yeah.
Like even minor slaps on the wrist for what you do. All right? When Trump was supposedly arrested for his campaign finance violation, he wasn't handcuffed. He didn't have to do like the standard perp walk. In fact, he was even offered to have his arraignment happen over Zoom. That's the type of shit that does not happen if you are an average everyday American. That's the type of shit that you only get if you are an elite like Donald Trump. And this type of deal that Hunter Biden got is the type of deal that you only get if you are an elite. Now, I'm not saying that he should have the book thrown at him anymore because he's an elite. What I'm saying is that we should treat average everyday Americans the same way we treat those elites. All right? First off, if we acknowledge the fact that being addicted to crack cocaine not only is not something that you should go to prison for, but should also be something that is taken into account when deciding whether or not to charge you with a gun-related charge. That is the type of thing that needs to be applied to everybody. All right? That's the type of justice system that we need to have for everybody. We need to be making sure that the people that are charged, the people that are put in prison, are the people that are actually a danger to society. And that is not what's happening. 1 in 5 people in prison are in prison for drug-related offenses. When elites do it, we don't care. When everyday Americans do it, we throw them in prison. All right? So the take from this should be we need to end the war on drugs. And we need to treat everyday Americans the same way, with the same with the same kid gloves that we treat Donald Trump and Hunter Biden. There is a multi-tiered justice system, but it has nothing to do with partisan bias and has everything to do with elites. And Hunter Biden and Donald Trump are both in the good part of it.
Yes,
they're in the part that you want to be.
Yeah.
They're both benefiting. So Hunter Biden committed crimes. He's being charged with it, and he is being given kid gloves. You know, he is being treated. He is being treated with kid gloves. All right, that is absolutely true. But to try to pretend that the real story here is that he got off easy because he's a Biden is missing so much about our justice system. And of course they're going to miss that. Because the people that are having the conversation, the media, the politicians, they're in that same elite tier of the justice system. So for them, it's the most obvious thing in the world that you would treat them differently, that you would treat them better. All right? This conversation that we're having, what I'm saying would never even occur to them.
Yeah, because they assume they're not a danger to society.
Yeah.
And now it's time for one of our favorite segments, the D-Bag Awards. So Nathan, what's a D-Bag Award?
Well, Michael, the D-Bag Award is an award that we like to give out to people who just make silly, stupid, pathetic, self-defeating arguments that are just so funny on their face and so, self-destroying that we just have to point at them and laugh at them. And of course it's named after Alan Dershowitz for that fateful time that he stood in front of Congress and said that Donald Trump could not possibly have done anything that rose to the level of impeachment when he pressured Ukraine to investigate his political opponent, because Trump believed that it was within his best interest to win the election.
I love that one. That's amazing.
It was an argument that we found so insultingly stupid that we had to name an award after it.
Sure did.
So, Michael, I mean, you're the one that suggested that came up with this one for this week, and I you know what, I gotta say, I don't know if this can quite reach the Dershowitz level of self-defeating.
Hold my beer. So our D-bag this week is Ryan Helfensbein. This guy
Wait. His name is Helfensbein?
Helfenbein. Maybe it's an alias. But why would you pick it?
Yeah, why would you pick that?
So
what an interesting name.
Yeah, this guy is the executive director of Liberty University's Standing for Freedom Center. So if that doesn't set you up for a D-bag award, I don't know what does.
Okay.
Yeah, so
I mean, Liberty University, liberty means freedom, and standing for freedom, that he's standing for liberty. So, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So he was in an interview at a gala hosted by the religious right activist Ralph Reed for his Faith and Freedom Coalition. And he was being asked about, of course, kids in schools and trans people and controlling education. And, he said something that just really gave it all away. And I think he was just a little too honest about his position. So he said, basically, this is an evangelistic movement on the left, and that's what's happening. It's indoctrination. I mean, they're proselytizing to the next generation. What we're discovering as parents and conservatives is, wait a second, education really is evangelism. So if you do not take control of education, you cannot control the future. And Stalin knew that, Mao knew that, Hitler knew that. We have to get that back for conservative values. I love that. I love that it's just so straight. It's so rare to hear someone just so clearly step on the rake with their commentary.
Oh, man. Already, at the beginning of the commentary, I'm thinking, so much projection here. Education is evangelism.
Yep.
Because in education, what we try to do is teach people how to think for themselves. We don't teach them what to think. We teach them how to think. All right. How to critically think, how to critically analyze, at least if education is doing what it's supposed to be, that's what you're doing. All right. And what you're saying is that critical thinking, trying to teach critical thinking is the equivalent of evangelism.
Yeah. Indoctrination.
Which, by the way, you're already implying that when you make that claim, you're implying that there is something inherently negative about evangelism, but then you're admitting that you do it too.
Yeah. You're also saying that your evangelism is not the critical thinking.
Yeah.
It doesn't come with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then to move on to be to say that education, that one, controlling the minds of the youth of today is about controlling the future. Boom, that's fucking scary fucking 1984 shit. And that would probably rise to the level of D-bag enough. And then to just the cherry on top, comparing yourself to Stalin and Mao and Hitler, and then saying not only we need to get that for conservative values, no, we need to get that back. He's saying that we've had it. We've done the Hitler thing. With the youth, with the Hitler youth. And they need to get that back for conservative values. That's amazing.
I gotta say, as an educator, my favorite moments are when a student changes my mind. All right. As a public speaking teacher, my students do persuasive speeches. All right. So they have to perform a persuasive speech for the class. And oftentimes they'll do a persuasive speech on something that I don't agree with them on. And that's okay. I don't have to agree with them on everything. But my favorite moments are either when a student changes my mind or when a student does a speech that I disagree with, but they make a really fucking good argument. Like, I love when that happens. I love it when a student is thinking for themselves, comes to a conclusion independent of me completely, like using the tools that I gave them in terms of like, here is how you think through issues. Here is how you critically analyze a situation, and then comes to a different conclusion than I do, but still is able to argue it and articulate it and discuss it in a intellectually honest and compelling way. I love when that happens. All right. That's not what evangelism is. All right. That is not evangelism.
Yeah, seriously.
And I think Hitler would probably hate me for it.
Yeah. I feel like one of our goals in life should just be someone that Hitler would have hated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this guy's like, no, Mein Kampf has got some good stuff. I got to write this down.
This Hitler guy, he's got a point. He's got a point.
Really good ideas from these fellows.
This Mao guy, the Stalin guy, I mean, we need to be more like them. Dude.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah, seriously.
At the Faith and Freedom
Conference?
That's the Freedom
part.
Conference?
That's amazing. So congratulations.
We should be more like fascists.
Yeah. Faith and Fascist Coalition. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
Congratulations to Ryan Helfenbein for being this week's D-Bag. And now we'll end our show as we usually do with our highlights. So Nathan, what's your highlight this week?
Well, Michael, my highlight this week is kind of a preemptive one, which actually might end up being my highlight next week. And that is the fact that next week is actually my birthday, and my parents are going to be coming to my parents and my grandmother are going to be coming to stay with us for a little bit. And I'm just really looking forward to that. Really looking forward to spending some time with them, to party, we actually last year we discovered that there's a really nice hill park type place close to our house that has a really great view of fireworks that we can just walk to.
Amazing.
So we're gonna watch the fireworks, and I'm just looking forward to it.
Awesome. That is great, dude.
Yeah. Mike's, what's your highlight?
My highlight, I think, I actually have two. One, we had some friends visiting this past weekend, and we had an awesome time in Olympic National Park, which is absolutely gorgeous. Got to go hiking. We did, it was really fun. And it was a friend I hadn't seen in a while, so that was really fun. But the main highlights are that on Sunday, it was my wedding anniversary, and on Tuesday, it was my wife's and my anniversary of dating. So, married
How
for
long
6
has it been,
years.
Michael?
Yeah, married for 6 years, dating for 12 years now. So it's been a while, and it's really, it was really fun. We kind of have been peppering celebrations and stuff throughout the week, and we're going to Vancouver this weekend to do some more celebrating as well. So that'll be really fun. The benefit of living just 2 hours from Vancouver.
12 years, man. That's crazy. I remember those days.
Yeah, dude.
And one thing that our listeners might not know about is that his wife actually purchased him from me with a bag of beef jerky.
Sure, it's important to pay tribute to the rightful. We should actually. I just had a really funny idea. I'm gonna mention it to Bree. We should send you a bag of beef jerky every year.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I don't think that's I wouldn't complain. I think the last time that I saw y'all in person, she brought a bag of beef jerky.
It is pretty typical for her to bring a bag of beef jerky when we're all together. Yeah, that's fair. And now we will thank the amazing people that make this show possible. So thank you to our incredible patrons, Jerry DeViller, Kyle Chaska, Fade Out Scoop, Taylor Bloom, and Tobias Janssen. And thank you so much to our incredible editor, Kayla, for all they do to make this show possible. And if you want to listen to more of The Perspectrum, you can go and find us on YouTube. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/theperspectrum and throw us a couple bucks and get some extra stuff. And thank you so much. Even if you're just tuning into the show and you're not a patron or a YouTube watcher, thank you so much for listening to The Perspectrum, and you'll hear from us again.